There's a series of talks going on today in Turkey. Sadly, President Putin did not show up to them. President Zelensky, very critical of Russia for sending what he called stand-in props to these peace talks instead of Vladimir Putin attending. Let's talk about this with Leigh Turner, former British ambassador to Ukraine. I'll get back to your calls in a few moments. Leigh Turner is also author of Lessons in Diplomacy, Politics, Power and Parties. Well, there's a great deal of that going on, I imagine, in Turkey today. Leigh, what's your reading of things?
What on earth is going on here? It's so confusing, isn't it? Each side says different things. Everybody is weighing in. I think the main thing here is that last week, you'll remember Keir Starmer and EU leaders went to Kiev to press Russia on a ceasefire. And they said if Russia didn't agree to a ceasefire, they would impose new sanctions. And it seemed like the US went along with that. And in response, Putin kind of tried to turn that aside by calling for direct peace talks with the Ukrainians today in Istanbul. So his goal, Putin, was to try and stop those new sanctions and try to show he was interested in peace. But then Zelensky, President Zelensky of Ukraine, rather cleverly called Putin's bluff and said, look, OK, I'll see you there. And Putin hasn't come. So I think the key point here is that Putin is demonstrating for all to see that he's really not interested in peace, because if he'd met Zelensky, he'd have literally nothing to say. But he's trying desperately to stay on the right side of President Trump by kind of indicating that, yeah, he'd like peace talks at some point somehow.
Our own Prime Minister, who's in Albania and Tirana, has predictably criticised Putin for not taking part in these talks. Ukraine has long been clear, he said several months ago, that they would have a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, and we have long said it's Putin who's standing in the way of that peace. So what next? I mean, everybody else can meet and talk, and that's all great, but doesn't get us where we need to be, does it?
It certainly doesn't. Really, unless Putin himself can be persuaded to take this peace process seriously, nothing's going to happen. And we're going to be trapped in this ghastly attritional war with thousands of Russian and Ukrainian troops and many Ukrainian civilians being killed every day. But unfortunately, President Putin has successfully strung Donald Trump in the White House along for 4 months since Trump was elected, making absurd demands and talking about what happened in the 10th century to justify his invasion. And President Trump's very strange negotiators, such as Steve Witkoff, his envoy to Moscow, seem to take them seriously. Whereas, of course, if Putin raised that stuff with Zelensky or the Ukrainians, they'd just laugh in his face. And if you're asking what might happen next, Sheila, I think the only hope for all of us is that President Trump realizes that Putin is treating him like an idiot and gets tough with Moscow.
Well, you've taken the conversation exactly where I was about to myself. I'm just looking at images here on the televisions in the studio of Donald Trump, bestriding the Middle East yesterday and again today in Abu Dhabi. And I mean, he has work to do there, fair enough. But I wonder when that is done, whether that is the time we will see, let's hope, because Trump is the only person who can shift this, isn't it, when it comes to Putin?
I think Trump has enormous influence to move President Putin if President Trump could use that influence. As I say, up to now, Putin has treated him like an idiot for 4 months, and President Trump's advisors don't seem to be able to communicate this to President Trump. We've even seen China and Brazil, very strangely, on Tuesday, issuing a joint statement calling for direct negotiations. And the Brazilian president said he would push Putin to take part in the talks with Zelensky. So it's blindingly obvious that Putin's not interested. And I think the best thing to move him would be these secondary sanctions that people keep talking about. That would be to sanction those countries that continue to import oil from Russia. In the past, the Americans have been very reluctant to do that because they don't want to push up oil prices. But at the moment, there's an oil glut, so they could very easily do that. And I think that would bring Putin to the negotiating table pretty quick.
Thank you very much indeed, Leigh. Let's hope that happens. Leigh Turner, former British ambassador to Ukraine. And if you want to check out his book,